Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I know everyone's calendars are very busy and full these days, so we appreciate you joining us for this hour. So, quick round of introductions. I'm Ruthy Mabe. I manage the security services business here at MCNC. I see a lot of familiar faces, or at least names, in the attendees list. So if I've worked with you before, good to see you. If we haven't, I look forward to working with you in the future. If there are things, action items that come out of today's training that you're interested in, having some more one-on-one time with the MCNC team, please reach out and let me know. We'll share our contact information at the end of the presentation. Also with me today is Douglas Holland from Akamai. Douglas, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Ruthy. I'm Douglas Holland. I'm a solutions engineer here at Akamai on our public sector team, and I have a specific focus on our state, local, and education business. So I support SLED business all across the country. Really honored to be able to speak with you all today.
Thanks, Douglas. All right, so let's jump right into the agenda. So we're going to give a brief overview of the service for those of you that are not familiar with it. We'll look at what's new. Douglas is going to walk us through some of the new features, some of the changes that have been made in the portal if you haven't logged in a while. We're going to also do an overview of all of the available features. Some of them you may be using, some of them you may not know that they're available. So we'll go through that. And then at the end, we're going to save about 10 minutes for Q&A. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and start, just give a quick overview. So one of the things that we've talked about a lot is that it's an easy thing to do to set this service up and forget about it, because it's an easy thing to have running in the background. You have that filtered DNS protection that is providing you that security protection on your network. So what we have seen is we went through all of this activity to get everyone onboarded and set up, and then, to be quite honest, a lot of people haven't logged back in since, right? Because that protection's happening in the background. Maybe there's not a lot of action that you need to take on your part. So we wanted to highlight to you, some of the changes that have happened. We want to, answer some of the questions that we get on a sort of regular basis around, okay, so I see this, what now, right? Or, hey, could I do this with the policy? Those types of things. So, please, if we are going over a topic and you say, hey, I'm in here and I'm looking at this, what about this? Feel free to pop that into the chat, and I will be happy to interrupt Douglas in the middle of his presentation. At the end, before the Q&A, we are going to do a demo. So, Douglas will actually go in and click around. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Douglas, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Sounds good. All right. So we go to the next slide. One of the changes that we've made is, kind of a product name change of the service that we're providing for y'all. And so most of you probably know it as Enterprise Threat Protector. And when we first rolled this out, that's kind of what it was. It was just a service that looked at DNS requests and kind of helped prevent or protect, users in your organizations from the threats that are out there on the internet. And the product, of course, still does that, but it's kind of evolved into more of what we see here on the screen, more of a secure web gateway. And we put this out at the edge of the internet and try to keep, users still protected, from the stuff that we see on the screen, all the malware and phishing and command and control and all that stuff, all the stuff that you signed up to use the service for in the first place. But we've added a bunch of other functionality. So all the things you see here on the screen are the things that we want to talk about today, things like application visibility and control, being able to control access to certain applications, and kind of all of the different things you might see in those little blue boxes. So the product has evolved a little bit, and we've made a name change, so it's now called Secure Internet Access, because we're doing more than just threat protection with the product. We've kind of evolved this to be kind of a secure web gateway at the edge. Now, for those of you that's like, man, I don't need all that stuff, Well, don't worry about that. I mean, you can continue using the service exactly as you do today. So if, I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff that you can do, especially with the service that you have in place today. If you don't feel like using any of that stuff, if you want to just keep it the way it is, where we're looking at your DNS requests, resolving the good ones, blocking the bad ones, if that's all you want to do, perfect. We can just leave it exactly the way it is. You don't have to make any changes. You don't have to use any of the things that we're talking about here, but did want to highlight some changes we've made in the product, some upgrades, some cooler things that we can now do, and just, give you that awareness. So if, any of this stuff sounds interesting, you're like, hey, we've been looking for a solution for that kind of thing, you'll know that it's available, and you can set those things up. And if you need help, then Ruthy and her team are available. Aaron's on the call. He's a guy that can help you with all that stuff, and then I'm here to back him up. So we'll make sure that you get every ounce of functionality out of this thing that you might need. Next slide, please. So did want to just, kind of review, and it may be a lot of y'all have been with us for a long time. So did want to kind of refresh, kind of the architecture of the product, and kind of, talk about at a high level what the product can do. So when we look at, kind of items 1 and 2 on the screen, this is what most of you all are using us for. And this is, like I said, kind of was the core functionality of the product when we first rolled it out. So in your external DNS forwarders, in your internal DNS system, you basically set Akamai up to be your external DNS resolution service, your recursive DNS service. So basically anything that's not internal to your network, you're sending those requests out to Akamai, and we're resolving those for you. So we're looking at those. We're applying our cloud security intelligence to those requests. So doing, the things that I was just talking about, we're resolving the good ones, so MCNC.org, Akamai.com, GitHub, YouTube, all of the, these sites that are useful, have a purpose on the internet, and we know they're safe. We know we can resolve them all the time, resolving those. The bad domains, we've got, domains that were set up for the sole purpose of doing malicious things. We know we can block those all the time. They don't provide any useful purpose on the internet. So we know we can block those, every single time. So if that's the way you're using our service and you'd like to keep it that way, that's perfectly fine. We got thousands of customers in the public sector doing just that today. But we may be thinking, you know what, Douglas, this is 2022. The world isn't just black and white. There's got to be stuff in between this good and bad, situation that you're talking about. And you're absolutely right. So at Akamai, we classify those as what we might call risky domains. And a risky domain could be, typically a domain that's, safe at the root of the domain, but then there's paths on that domain that have been compromised, and maybe they're used as malware drop sites or phishing sites or something like this. So if you think about, maybe domain.com, maybe that's safe to resolve. But if it's domain.com / Doug's malware repository, that does sound a little sketchy. We might want to have a little closer look at that. And so for those risky domains, what we can do is forward those requests out to this proxy service, the ETP proxy that you're seeing there. So this is a proxy that lives out in our infrastructure, nothing you have to install. But when we redirect those requests out to the proxy service, we can now start looking at the URL of what's being requested. So those, potentially compromised paths, we can start picking those up, and just making the service a little bit more accurate, and looking at the URLs, and specifically keeping folks, protected from that perspective. Now, when we activate this proxy service, it does give us, some added functionality, and we'll look at this when we get into the demo. We're going to talk about some, what we call application visibility and control. So being able to, control access to applications that live out on the internet that you typically didn't have a whole lot of control of. We can, determine, are my users going to these kinds of sites? If so, is that allowed? Do we want to allow access to these, things like file sharing services, social media, video sites, etc.? And if they are allowed to go to these sites, what functions can they do when they're on those sites? So we can kind of get some controls around that. So in the demo, I can show you what this looks like, and it'll be a little more clear when we look at how it actually works. Also inclusive with the service is this client software. So if you have devices that are not always behind your firewall, and we got folks taking laptops home, or folks that are still working from home, people that are traveling, whatever the case may be, we can install this client software on devices to enforce this service for DNS resolution, and then it can also apply a policy on those devices. So this is the primary use case of the software is to keep folks protected even when they're not behind the firewall. Now, it does have the added benefit of being able to let you know what device on your network made a request that's in violation of your policy. So let's say we've got a device with the software on it, and somebody's clicked on a phishing link. It's going to take action and block that phishing request, but it's also going to report in the IP address and machine name of the device that made that request. So the client software is one of the ways that we have of determining what devices on your network are making these requests, so you can go back and either have training or remediate action if maybe a device is reaching out to command and control infrastructure. Could indicate there might be some kind of something going on with that device. It would be handy to know what device that is so we could go back and take a look at that. If we can jump to the next slide, I want to talk about one of the new things that we've developed since many of y'all have come on board. When we're talking about determining what devices on our network made these requests that are in violation of our policy, the client software is one way of doing it, and the other one is called using a security connector. Now, some of y'all have used our security connector, and we had, when we first rolled out security connectors, we used them as a sinkhole. And basically what we would do is, set up one of these virtual machines, and it would send any malicious requests. Instead of somebody clicked on a phishing link, instead of returning the IP address for the phishing site, so instead of saying hey, here's the IP address for phishing.com, we would return the IP address of the security connector. And so now our machines would be making connection requests to what they thought was phishing.com, but it's actually connecting to the security connector. And in that case, we were able to capture the machine details, the IP address and machine name. Now, I'm hopefully not opening a lot of wounds with a lot of y'all, because I'm sure some of you have used the security connector, and we found that it kind of worked sort of okay sometimes, but it wasn't really consistent. And we did have a lot of instances where we were not able to kind of correlate a DNS request with an actual connection request. And the sinkhole just flat out just didn't work well enough. So, and I know a lot of you have had some, kind of pain and suffering from that, and I apologize for that. But we do have a new way of using these security connectors that is much, much more accurate, and we have a greater instance of success with this. And this is now using these virtual machines as DNS forwarders. So, to kind of cast your memory back to a security connector. A security connector is nothing more than just a virtual appliance. We've got two versions. We've got one for VMware, one for Microsoft Hyper-V. So whatever virtual environment you're using, you can just download the appropriate package, install this appliance in your virtual environment. And in this case, what we would want to do is ideally install two of these. Now, with the sinkhole, we recommended you put a public IP address on those virtual machines. In the DNS forwarder mode, we can put private IP addresses on there, and we're going to have two of these hopefully installed, because what we're going to do is in our DHCP scope specify that our primary and primary and secondary DNS values that we hand out are the IP addresses of these DNS forwarders. So now what happens is all the DNS requests from your device go to the DNS forwarders first, and the DNS forwarder is going to basically act like it's like a DNS traffic cop, if you will. It's going to look at the request and say, well, you know what, this is internal to our network. I need to send this down to our internal DNS server so it can resolve that request. Anything external to your network, though, it's going to send it out to Akamai, and then we'll take action on that DNS request based upon your policy. Now, since these DNS forwarders are now in line with the DNS request, we're going to be able to capture that IP address and machine name every single time. So it works really, really well. So here it looks like we've got a server servers wouldn't be able to install client software on servers. So this is a great use for that. This server looks like it may be compromised in some way. Maybe we're reaching out to command and control infrastructure. The requests for that command and control domain are going to hit the DNS forwarder first. Going to be able to capture that IP address and machine name information. So now we can, track down that server and go and have a look at it. And if it is, infected in any way, be able to remediate that infection. So this is the new way that we have of determining what devices are making requests on your network. If you're not interested in seeing that, you don't need to use these at all. These are only required when we want to find out the machine details of machines making requests that violate our policy, and we can install, or we either can't or don't want to install the client software.
Hey, Douglas,
All right.
a question
Yes, ma'am.
came in.
Yeah.
A question came in about using the security connector in Azure or AWS. Is that an option?
It is not today. I think that's something that we're looking at. Would be kind of a uncommon use case, I would think, just because most of the DNS requests, your outbound DNS requests, are going to be coming from devices on your network. Typically, devices out in cloud services like AWS and Azure aren't really going out to the internet. Now, of course, they are going to have to be able to go out and, get things like patches and things like that. And of course, those devices, could become compromised and reach out to command and control infrastructure. So there's no specific connector for those cloud devices. Now, what you can do, and I have this, working on, in my lab and on my laptop, you could, install a virtual machine in AWS or Azure. It could be a Windows device, a Linux device, whatever the case may be. But you could run Oracle VirtualBox or some kind of virtual, software from there. So like I've got a security connector running on my device now. I use Oracle VirtualBox, and now I can import that OVA into VirtualBox and set up the connector that way. So you could do it in that manner. You wouldn't have the appliance directly, but you would have the appliance running on another VM in AWS or Azure. So it is possible to do it that way.
Great, thank you. And then we had another question. If someone is currently using the security connector as a sinkhole, do they repurpose that device, or is it just a new configuration? How would that work?
Depending on how old that security connector is, if it's in one of the more recent versions, we could probably use that as DNS folder. I'd have to go back and look at the documentation to see what version is required for DNS folder. I would suggest, though, probably just installing a brand new security connector. We got a new version that has just come out, version 3.2.1, which is the latest and greatest. And we've got a kind of a lot of functionality built into that security connector. It literally takes the longest part about installing the security connector is actually downloading the OVA. We can set, once you get that thing installed in your virtual environment, the setup on it takes less than 10 minutes. It's just giving it, there's two interfaces. You give them each interface an IP address. You specify the IP address of your internal DNS server or DNS servers, and basically activate the VM, and really you're done. And it's just that simple to set up. So if you get to the point where you want to maybe try using these and you need some help getting them set up, let me know. I can help you get those set up. Like I said, it takes literally 10 minutes to get them up and go.
Great, thank you.
We can pop to the next slide. Also new, and there's been like Ruthy mentioned, a lot of you that maybe haven't logged into the Akamai Control Center in a long time and haven't looked at your policy. We did kind of change the way we do our category and content filtering. We started using a new provider that gave us a little bit, actually more capabilities, more categories, better accuracy with those. There, we wanted to just have this slide, and we can make this slide available for y'all, so you know what the new categories are. But here we can see the discontinued categories on the left-hand side, and what the new categories are on the right-hand side in the new with our new category mapping system. But we did want to just bring this up just because there are some of y'all that had been using some of the old AUP categories, and we did communicate out that we were changing to a new thing. But in the all the emails y'all get, it's easy to lose those kind of things in the shuffle in email, or maybe you didn't see the notification, and so just wanted to make this just as an awareness thing for y'all. So, and we can look at the acceptable use policy stuff in the demo. Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I'll add here is if you are going in and making changes to your policy, maybe you're logging in for the first time in several months, and you try and make a change to a policy and have not already accepted sort of this conversion of your acceptable use policy by clicking on this confirm button, right? The orange confirm button. It will force you to confirm that before you can deploy changes to your policy. So it's really important that if you see this and you have the pop-up that says, hey, these pending, changes, you need to take a look at them and approve them, that you do pay attention. Because what we've seen, if you're using some of the legacy categories, for example, I can't actually even remember, you're gonna have to keep me honest, Douglas. One of them was it was maybe social media, and it then transitioned over into a chat category, which then temporarily broke Google Chat, right? Which was an unintended consequence, right, of that sort of migration, right? I'm fairly confident that most of those things have been resolved in the back end by Akamai now. But the point being, make sure that if you have the AUP set up and you're wanting to say, okay, I want this category to be blocked, and it's now being mapped to a new category, that you understand sort of what's included in those new categories. And there's one other place that when we get into the demo, that your policy page has actually changed. And so if you have some of these old legacy policies out there, you may not even see the risky categories that Douglas was talking about earlier. And if that's the case, it might be time for you just to create a whole new policy and migrate your existing configuration there. But we can talk about that, Douglas, when we get into the demo. I can highlight where you would look for that. Okay.
Perfect. Next slide.
All right.
Did want to kind of provide this slide to kind of show you with the free version that you get with MCNC. All of the items here that are checked are features that y'all have available. So we do have the ability to do the content filtering, set up your acceptable use policies. Of course, we're going to protect all your users from malware, phishing, command and control, all that kind of stuff. You do have with the proxy service the ability to do URL blocking. We're going to get into this application visibility and control because it's really the most exciting new feature that we put into there, and I think it's really cool. I think you all are going to really like this. You're going to see there where it says block application operations. There's not a check mark there. Guess what? You do. There should be a check mark there because you do have that control, and I'm going to show you how that gets used. Mobile devices, we didn't. When we're talking about clients, other things we've got clients for now are. Out of the control center, you can get your Windows and Mac versions, but if you've got iOS devices, iPads, iPhones that you want to protect, any Android devices, if you've got Chromebooks that can run Android software, we can support those as well. So in the Play stores, we've got iOS and Android versions of the client. So if you got those kind of devices, we can now protect those as well. So all the things that you see here that have check marks are the features that are associated with the service today.
Thank you, Douglas. And so one thing to point out here in the demo, Douglas is going to show his demo environment that has some of these other features that are actually turned on. We're not going to really talk in great detail about some of the things that don't have the check marks next to them, obviously because they're not included in the service that's available to you at no cost. If you see something on this list and you're like, man, this really, really checks the box, right? For me, I need this thing. Reach out security services at mcnc.org or Mabe at mcnc.org. That gets you to me. And we can have a conversation about what the difference in the price would be if you got one of these higher tiers of the service. So by no means is this intended to be a sales pitch. We do believe, again, with the intelligence level, it's a great service offering. But if you see something that you're interested in, please feel free to reach out and we can have that conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
95% of the functionality of secure internet access is available in the free version that y'all have. So there isn't, don't have FOMO. You're not missing out on a ton of stuff. There are a couple of cool things we can do with the advanced threat version of the product, but you're not missing out on a whole lot.
Great, thank you.
All right. With that, I'm going to go ahead and steal the screen share from Ruthy, and
okay.
We'll start looking at some of this stuff that we talked about here, because like we've mentioned, there's been a lot of changes, and the first change that you might notice, especially if some of y'all have not logged in a really long time, there is a updated GUI for the secure internet access service. So if you haven't been on in a while, if you go to control.akamai.com, this is the Akamai Control Center. This is the portal that you use to, manage your configuration and get your reporting and all that kind of thing. What we do is click on our menu up here, and the new tool that you use to manage your secure internet access service here is called Enterprise Center. I think some of y'all are using our Enterprise Threat Protector product and Enterprise Application Access. What Enterprise Center was designed to do is kind of provide a unified, kind of portal to be able to manage all of your, products that fit into our, kind of zero trust network architecture. So, we've got our Enterprise Application Access, Secure Internet Access. We've got a multi-factor authentication product now. All this stuff can be managed right here from one kind of control center here called Enterprise Center. So when you log into Enterprise Center, of course, you see your dashboard here that's got all your little widgets that you can see. If you ever forget what your DNS server values are, each one of you have your own set of virtual IPs that are assigned to your organization. You see those right here in your DNS server widget. There is one change that we made in the locations that I wanted to highlight for y'all. And if you remember what a location is, the location is basically associated with an egress point to the internet. So if you have just a single internet connection that everybody egresses out of, you might just have one location. But if you have multiple internet connections in your organization, you can set those up as separate locations. What that does is allow you to associate different policies with your locations, and it does allow you to get reporting based upon those locations as well. But a new change that we've made in the locations, and basically the way a location works is anytime we see traffic coming from the IP addresses associated with your locations, we'll know that traffic's coming from your organization, and then we'll know, hey, apply this policy to that traffic. So here in my lab, we've got one of the things that you can do is use a dynamic DNS hostname. This is what I've done. So if you've got like library locations and things of that nature that maybe have dynamic IP address, you can set up dynamic DNS host names, and so it will use those when you're setting these up. But what I wanted to show you was this new ability that we have to be able to create what's called a sublocation. So let's say we've got a location that's set up, but we want to apply a different policy to different parts of our organization. Maybe everybody's egressing out of one internet connection, but we've got most of our users are egressing and we want a policy to apply to them, but now we got maybe a guest wireless network that we want a different policy to apply to, or maybe we've got, maybe a student policy, and then we've got a different one that we want to apply to like faculty and staff. If those users are on separate subnets in your organization, we can set up a sublocation. So it's just the same as setting up a regular location. We give it a name, a description. Now we can assign a different policy to that sublocation. And now in here, we'll put in the internal subnet. So if you've got, maybe a 10 dot, network in your organization, as long as we can specify a subnet that the different users are on, we can make that work. So the sublocations is a kind of a cool feature that allows us to get kind of granular within our network, especially if we were trying to apply different policies to different groups of people. Do keep in mind when we want to use the sublocations policy, we do need to use the proxy service for that. So we have to have a proxy policy for that. Policies themselves, if we jump right into the policy, I'm going to pull up my little demo policy here so we can take a look at changes that may be applicable, since the last time y'all have maybe looked at your policy. So the top part here really hasn't changed. This is, kind of the core blocking and tackling of the service, and the stuff that y'all have been using since day one. So we've got our known and suspected malware, phishing, command and control, DNS data exfiltration domains. You can choose what to do with those. Typically, we're going to have all these set to block, give your users an error page. If we want to know when these things are happening, we've got the alerts that we can turn on. So if folks are clicking on phishing links and we want to know about it, just turn on alerts, and anytime somebody clicks on the phishing link, we'll send you an email and let you know that happened. Same thing with any of the other things here. But we did mention, and this is what Ruthy was talking about a minute ago, we've added this little risky area down here. Now, these are risky from a DNS perspective. So these aren't the URL path kind of things. These are kind of what we would classify as risky domains from a DNS perspective. So if you're using a DNS only policy, these will apply. So things like adware, coin mining, and all these different kind of things are new things that you can configure in your policy. So as a typical rule of thumb, what I generally recommend to my customers is to set your adware, coin mining, potentially harmful domains, and DNS tunneling. Typically set those to block. And then your newly registered or newly seen domains, maybe just set those to monitor. Keep an eye on those. We'll let you know when any of these are encountered, so you can kind of take a look at them and make a determination. Hey, maybe I want to switch these. These could look a little problematic. Maybe I want to switch these to a blocking state, or maybe just leave them in monitor so you can kind of keep an eye on those, and maybe get notifications when any of these are encountered, so we can kind of keep tabs on them. But these are risky domains from a DNS perspective, and you can set these controls as you see fit with that. Ruthy, did you want to say anything else on this part of the policy?
Yeah, so just two things. As Douglas mentioned, the risky domains that are visible right here do not require the proxy to be deployed.
Correct.
Right? So you can start utilizing that level of granularity without deploying the proxy. If you are logging in, you're following along, you look at your policies that maybe were set up 2 years ago, you will not see those risky, that risky category at the bottom of the threat tab in your policy. So the recommendation is to create a new policy and mirror, again, the same configuration that you have everywhere else in that new policy, and it will then generate, and you'll have the visibility of that risky category.
Yep.
Okay, that's all I have.
Perfect. All right. Access control. This is the exciting part that I wanted to kind of show you guys, because this is a lot of new stuff that we were talking about with the application visibility and control. In the AUP section here, we can do the same things that we've always been able to do, and that's your category, and kind of filtering kind of capability. We got 85 now different categories that we can select and choose an action on. So, things like pornography, gambling, drugs, all that kind of stuff. If those are, things that you want to block, you can certainly do that. Ruthy brought up, social media. So virtual communities is the new category for social media. So like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and all those kind of things live in virtual communities. And I'm going to highlight that I've got those set up to block because I want to show you something cool we can do with this policy. You got the ability to choose different actions. So depending on how our policy is set up, my policy here is set up to use the proxy service. So if I want to, allow those kind of things, I would select bypass. So now file sharing services bypass the proxy. If you're using a DNS only policy, you would just set those to allow these kinds of domains. And then you can also choose block or monitor. There are some things that you might want to, if you're using, the content filtering, there's a couple of things that you might want to set to a bypass or allow. One of them is this computer and internet security. If you're using a service like KnowBe4 or any of those kind of phishing training services, when you're using those are like KnowBe4, if you're using KnowBe4, they're going to send your users phishing links, right? And of course, there's a phishing sites. Our policy says block phishing, right? So we're going to block them, of course. But in this case, we really do want folks to be able to click on those so we can see, hey, who's not paying attention and clicking on the phishing links, right? So what we would do is set this computer and internet security. And in this case, since my policy is proxy, I would set that to bypass, but you would set it to allow in a DNS policy. So now those KnowBe4 domains will be allowed and we won't block those particular phishing sites. So that's one of the things I just wanted to highlight from there. Now, the other thing, this is the new part. We can look at the applications area here. And we track about 7,700 different applications that you typically wouldn't have a whole lot of control over, like I spoke of before. So if we're looking at this, we're going to see things like file sharing services. We're going to see social media. We're going to see video sites. Here we've got, Proton Mail. I had a customer of mine that was having problems with Proton Mail users on their network were going to this Proton Mail account and then they were downloading all this sketchy software. It was causing them problems. So they say, hey, we just want to block Proton Mail outright. So all they do is just select Proton Mail and block it, right? So all of these different kind of applications, you can either monitor them or block them outright, or what we might want to do is allow. So what I'm going to do here is select LinkedIn and I'm going to select bypass for this. Now, what I've just done in this policy is use the category and applications controls in kind of conjunction. So what we've done is set up a policy, and maybe we wanted to have this policy where, guys, we don't want you going to social media while you're on your work computers, while you're at work. Let's stay off social media. But what, LinkedIn is kind of business related. We can see the use case that we could allow you to go to LinkedIn. So the way I've set this up is in my categories, I've got virtual communities set to block. That's going to block our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those. But now in the application section, we've set LinkedIn to bypass. So now it's going to allow access to LinkedIn and block all your other social media. So you can do kind of granularity within your policies in that manner.
Hey, Douglas.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask you this. You use LinkedIn as an example. Would that be the same for KnowBe4 if someone just wanted to allow KnowBe4 but not the entire category that you were showing before?
Yeah, and I don't know if we've got KnowBe4 specifically in. Yeah, we don't really have KnowBe4 in the list of applications that we're tracking. Really not an application, it's more of a service. There is another way that we can do that though, and that's with your custom list. I'll talk about that next, but we can add those domains to an exception list, and then we will exclude those from being looked at.
Great.
The other thing we can do here, I talked about control, and this is that feature that I said didn't have a check mark on it, but you do have access. You'll have the ability to do what's called category operations. So I talked about, are my users going to these kinds of applications? If so, is that allowed? And then if that's allowed, what can they do when they're on these kind of sites. So if we remember back when we were looking at categories, I had file sharing set to bypass. So we're allowing folks to go to file sharing services, but maybe we want folks to be able to go to stuff like Dropbox, and maybe we want to say, you know what, you can go to Dropbox, you can look at any files that might already be in your own Dropbox, but we don't want you uploading stuff from our network up into Dropbox or these other file sharing services. So what we can do is select this control called uploading for file sharing, set that to block. Now, folks can go to file sharing services, but if they try to upload a file into Dropbox, no, not going to happen. So keep in mind this category operations does require the proxy service. With the DNS only policy, you can use the categories and the applications part because we'll block those at the DNS level. For the operations part, we do need the proxy service to be in place to use that. But we can do things, like social media. Maybe, okay, yeah, you can go to social media. Let's say, you can go to something like Twitter. You can read the tweets all day. That's fine. We don't want you tweeting from your work computer, uploading into or posting into social media sites. There's a category in there to prevent that. So you've got all these different kinds of controls that you can look at, like in chat sites and virtual communities, and uploading into virtual communities, posting in virtual communities, all these different kind of things you can set up. So gives you control over what users can do when they're accessing certain sites. So this is the control part. So not supposed to have access to it, but you do. So take advantage of it if that's something that's interesting for you. All right, talked about custom lists. To cast your memory back, custom lists are the tool that you have to set up your own lists of sites that you always want to block or always want to allow. So in the case of KnowBe4, you could also set up what's called an exception list. To get to the lists area, go here to policy, and in the lists area here, that's basically just a place where you can go and create these lists of sites. So you would create an exception list or a block list, and then put all the domains that you want associated with that. And then, basically when you create those lists of sites, you can now, they'll show up when you click on this little link. You can find the list you want, associate that list with your policy, and then please stop doing that. Thank you. Go here and find your list, and then decide what you want to do with an exception list. Mine is proxy service, so I'd set that to bypass. DNS only, you would just set that to allow. Now, keep in mind there are different kinds of lists as well. So depending on your policy, you might want to do either just a regular exception list, or if you're using the proxy service, you can do URL exception lists. So on your lists area, if you're using the proxy, you can get right down to the specific URL. So if there are certain paths on a domain that you want to prohibit access to, you can put those in your exception or block list as well. As long as you're using the proxy service, now we're looking at the URL, you can have URL lists in there. And there's also file hash exception lists too. So if there's file hashes that you want to prevent, as long as we're using the proxy, you can look at those as well. Last thing we'll look at here in the policy is how we turn on the proxy service. So most of y'all are using just the DNS only policy, and like I said, if that's all you want to do, fine. That's no worries there. You can just leave it as a DNS only, but we can change this to DNS plus proxy if we want to take advantage of the proxy service. You won't see this option in yours. Browsing restrictions is the same. We can enforce Google and Bing safe search functionality regardless of browser settings. Set up YouTube controls there. Did want to point out this client setting section. So I mentioned that we can apply a different policy to users when they're on net versus off net, right? So in our location, we can set up different policies for the client and for the on net location. So if let's say this is our on net policy and we want this policy to apply to users when they're on net and a different policy to apply when they're off net. What we would do is click on this disable client feature. What this does is lets the client know, hey, when I'm on network, when it's looking and seeing, hey, my traffic is going out one of our configured location IP addresses, it's going to kind of turn itself off and send all the requests to either the DNS forwarder or the internal DNS server. So it's going to let this policy apply. Now, when the user takes that device off network, the client's going to recognize, hey, I'm not on network anymore. I need to re-enable myself, so the client will be used as the on-ramp, and now the off-net policy will apply. So that's how we determine what policy applies when we're using clients. Now, if we want the same policy to apply when they're off net versus on net, just one policy that rules them all, just leave this off, and now the client will still be used when it's on network, but that same policy will be applied. Now, the policy, something new that's happening with the client software is it's now using DNS over TLS to make these requests. So by default, it's always going to attempt to do a DNS over TLS request. If DNS over TLS fails for whatever reason, then we'll revert back and make the request on UDP 53. Now, you've got controls over that. We can leave it like that. If you want to require that DNS over TLS is used in all cases, you can require it, or you can disable DNS over TLS altogether if you'd like. And then if it's appropriate, you can change your DNS over TLS port to 853 if you wanted to. So that is the changes with the policy. I want to leave time. Go ahead.
Sorry, real quick question. Back to disabling the ETP client. If you do that, based on policy and location, do you then, when it's disabled, do you lose the visibility of the client ID, right, associated with the DNS request? Like, will you continue to see the internal IP address and the device name, or is that no longer visible?
That is a yeah. I want to say no, but I'm gonna follow up with you on that one because I'm not 100% sure. I want to say that when the client's disabled, then you would need to have a security connector to be able to get that. When that device is on network. But I want to verify that for you. Because there's, because it doesn't, turn the client off per se. That client is still there. It's just the client saying, oh, okay, I'm on network, do it this way. So I want to verify what I think to be true is true. So I'll let you know.
Okay. And we'll follow back up with everybody who's attending. We'll add the answer to that question when I send out the link.
Yeah, great question. Not often you get it. Not often you stump me. That's darn it. All right, I know we're running short on time. I'm going to jump here real quick and look at the client software, just because there's a couple of new things on the client that I wanted to highlight, just to cast your memory back on how the client software works. And this could be new since some of you all have looked at this. You all may not see 4.4 for your Windows client yet. That is coming, so you'll start seeing that really, really soon. You might all just see like the 4.1 client. But the way that here we see the status is download, test, and approve. When you're using the client software, what we want you to do is kind of download the version of software that you'd like to use, put it on a machine and test it out, make sure that everything works the way they expect it to, and make sure it doesn't break any of your applications, stuff like that. But once you're comfortable with the way the client is working, you'll see this little approve button. So this version has been downloaded, and we've got this ability to be able to approve this software for use in our environment. So what you do is click this approve button, and now it says you've elected to upgrade all of your clients on Windows to version 4.1. And so you can hit continue there. What happens in that case is now we will upgrade any older versions of the client to the latest version that you've approved. So a question that I often get is, will you guys update our clients for us automatically, or when new versions come out, do we have to go in and reinstall? The answer is we will upgrade those for you automatically, but only be after you test it. We won't want to be pushing untested software out into your environment. So we make sure that you have the chance to make sure that it's not going to break stuff in your environment before we upgrade them. So wanted to call that out. In the configuration, a new feature that we have here. So of course you've got to turn this slider on to use the client. You've always had the ability to allow users to be able to disable the client. So when you open up the client, there's a little dialogue in there to be able to disable that client. We've got this new little feature here. This is the new part where we can disable the client with admin approval. So if I turn this on, the user can disable the client, but only if they have this code. So the entitlement code is the code that you use to install the software, and it kind of associates your versions of the client with your configuration. But now this entitlement code would allow the user to do that. So it says here, you or another administrator must securely provide this code to the user that you want. Now, let's say you've provided this code, but maybe it was like a one-time thing. We don't want this, user to be able to disable this client all the time. We can rotate that code just by clicking this little button here. That'll just rotate the entitlement code and get a new code. So you can have control over how long users can use that code to disable their client. Different than the version upgrade. So we've got this automatic upgrades for critical patches. So let's say you've got 4.1 clients and we come up with enhancements to the 4.1, or maybe there's bug fixes or whatever the case may be on the 4.1 client. If you've had this turned on, we'll automatically upgrade the same version of client for you if there's things that come up that need to be patched on that. And then if you didn't want to get your IP address and machine name, maybe you've got privacy concerns, don't want to collect that information, you can turn that off using this dialog here. Here on the bottom, there's some area where we can put in our IPv4, IPv6, DNS suffix, and corporate email domain information. This kind of just helps the client understand more about what's on your network versus off. Another place that you want to do that, especially if you're using the DNS forwarders, is here in the local bypass settings. So in the clients and connectors section, there's this local bypass settings. This is, if you're using the DNS forwarders, you're going to want to come in and populate this and put in all your internal DNS suffixes. And this could be, DNS suffixes that you don't want us to evaluate too. So like, especially if you're using a proxy policy, you can put in different domains out on the internet that you don't want us to send through the proxy. So put in WebEx and Zoom in here just to kind of, make sure we don't send those, we bypass the proxy on those. So it's another way you can handle that. But you can put in your IP address, email domains, and those kind of things in this section. Once again, helps the client software and the security connectors have a better understanding of what's on your network, what they need to send to the internal server versus what they need to send to Akamai. With that, that's the things that we wanted to show you today. Kind of some of the newer things that we've added to the product, and just kind of refresh your memory on all of the things that are possible from a policy perspective. We do have some time, so Ruthy, if there's more questions, let's see if we can get some questions answered.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the client, can you roll back to an older client if you have issues with the new version?
So in the clients, there isn't a rollback feature per se. So if you wanted to, let's say, we've got 4.1 and now we've upgraded a bunch of folks to 4.4. And now we've figured out, oh, this isn't working out too good. Not a graceful way to roll back to 4.1. In that case, what we would have to do is uninstall the client and reinstall the older version of the client. So now this, of course, can be automated with, an MDM or whatever software management system you're using. So it does take that, kind of manual process out of it, but you would have to set it up in your software management system to uninstall the newer version and reinstall the older version. Okay. So that's why we have this, download, test, and approve. So we do want you to, kind of test it out, make sure. And of course, as you're testing, can you test every single little thing? No, obviously not. But we try to take as much of the any kind of risks or any chance of things not working correctly by having you approve that first before we start upgrading everything for you.
Great, thank you. All right, so a sinkhole question: if you get rid of the sinkhole security connector, do you need to install two security connectors as DNS forwarders? And if so, can they reside on the same VM?
They can, and so the way these security connectors work is, and here I've got one that's set up in mind. When you get it set up as a DNS forwarder like I do, it'll show you that IP address that you've associated with the the EN1 interface here. So this is the DNS server value that you would use. You would ideally want to use two just so you have fallback. If there's a problem with one, then it would fall back to the other. You can put them on the same VM if you want, but just realize if something happens to the hypervisor, or there's something that affects that one security connector, it will affect both of them. So if you've got two and your DHCP scope is set up with, let's say, these two security connectors, and they both fail, then now you got no DNS resolution. So it could break DNS. So a best practice is to have them on separate hardware if you can. Will it work if they're on the same thing? Of course. So if we get it, you don't necessarily have this big data center where you can have all this specialized VMware set up. So you could do it one way or the other. The other thing you could do is in VMware or Hyper-V, set up one security connector, and if you didn't have a redundant set of hardware to kind of make those hardware independent, maybe you could set up like a server or something, run VirtualBox on that server, and then install a security connector in that way. That could be another way of doing it if you don't have redundancy in your virtual environment.
Great, thank you. All right, looks like we have time for one more question. Back to applications and operations from the policy setting to prevent file sharing uploads. Would adding a service such as OneDrive or Google Drive to bypass allow them to upload and then continue to block all the others like Adobe and Dropbox?
Fantastic question. So to configure it that way, and you can get super granular with that. So what I would do in my categories, I would set file sharing. In this case, I would set file sharing to block, because we want to block really all file sharing services except for the ones that we specifically say are okay. So we'd say, let's say file sharing is set to block. Now in applications, I would find the file sharing services that I would like to allow. So if it's Dropbox, if it's OneDrive, or it's whatever, let's say it's OneDrive, we want to allow folks to be able to use, it's in here someplace. I would set OneDrive in here, set the action to bypass or allow. Now we're going to, well, if we want to block it, it needs to be a proxy policy. So we would set OneDrive to bypass here in applications. And then in our category operations, we can say uploading to file sharing is blocked. Now with the policy set up that way, we're going to block all file sharing except OneDrive. And if users go to OneDrive, they will not be able to upload to file sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, Douglas. All right,
Gotcha.
We are at 12 o'clock on the dot. I'm sure that as we've gone through this, you may have additional questions that have come to mind. So please, as I mentioned before, feel free to reach out to security services at mcnc.org or security operations, which is the SecOps at mcnc.org. So those are the two ways that you can get in contact with the MCNC support team. And once you reach out to us, if we're able to help you, walk you through the installation of any of these additional features that we've been talking about, look at your policies, help look at the things that you're actually seeing in your environment. We didn't even talk about sort of the reporting and, hey, how do we look at the activity, right, that's being blocked, things like that. Feel free to reach out and we can, get something scheduled. And, if the MCNC team needs to pull Douglas in, we absolutely will. I'm sure that there's many of you that Douglas's name was not new to you the first time when you joined us today. So again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Douglas, for lending us your expertise today. And we will send out the recording soon and give some follow-ups on a couple of the open questions that we had through the day today. So thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.